Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about self-assessment updates for ST4 applications. My name is Nikki Osborne, and I'm one of the college ST4 self-assessment leads together with Drew Smith. We also have Marcia Reid, who is a senior manager from ANRO, also on the panel today, as well as Maria Michaela from the college, who's recording the webinar. So we're going to go through the webinar, and then during it or afterwards, you'll have the opportunity to post any questions in the Q&A tab, and we'll do our best to answer those at the end of the webinar. The webinar will be recorded and then put on the college website for you to review. And also we will publish the Q&A as well. But please don't write anything very specific about your particular uploads or your experience, because without seeing sort of evidence, we wouldn't be able to give you, say, how many points does this, for instance, count for. But any general questions will be very welcome. Okay, so we can move on, please, Drew. So this evening, we're going to give you a very quick overview of ST4 recruitment, and then information about what to include in your portfolio. And we also have some data on the previous rounds of scoring in the previous recruitment rounds. And as I've already said, yes, we'll be answering the questions in the Q&A at the end. So shortly, applications will be opening. I think it's next Wednesday or Thursday. For ST4 recruitment for August 26. And when you complete your application, you'll need to also complete your self-assessment scoring on the Oriel platform. And then at a later point, you'll be told when this will be, you'll actually need to upload this information onto your portfolio. Long listing might still be happening during this process, just to make you aware of. So the point of the self-assessment is for you to showcase your achievements and demonstrate your CV. After your portfolio evidence is uploaded, then it is verified by an experienced assessor who will be a consultant anaesthetist, and they will look at all your evidence and then either agree with your score, or your score could potentially increase or decrease depending on the evidence that's been submitted. Then after the self-assessment scores have been released, there is a short window in which if you don't agree that your portfolio has been marked accurately, then you can actually appeal your score. So all this information will be on the timeline on the ANRO website. Just to be aware, you can request one or more domains for appeal, and also the portfolio organisation score can be appealed. And then a senior, very experienced review panel look at these to see whether they agree with the assessor or whether any changes need to be made. And the review panel consists of people that have had a lot of experience of doing this before. They're often heads of schools, TPDs, RAs, etc. Again, your score can be either agreed that it's the same as the assessors, or it could be increase or decrease. Occasionally, we have to use self-assessment scoring for shortlisting if there is not enough interview slots. But for the last few rounds, we've not had to do that, and everyone that's been longlisted has been given an interview. And just to remind you that the self-assessment makes up a third, roughly, of the overall score, with the other 2/3 consisting of your interview score. Very briefly, what happens with the interview? The interview process is all online. You'll get an opportunity to book your slot. The interview consists of 2 consecutive interviews, each of 15 minutes. Before the clinical judgment station, there is a 5 minutes reading station time to be able to read the information before you actually go into that interview. And just to remind you, there's no separate CV because your CV will have already been assessed in your self-assessment portfolio. So the general interview assesses the domains of professional behaviours and communication, teamwork, and then GPCs of audit, research, teaching, etc. And it is an opportunity for you to be able to talk about your achievements, and you'll have that opportunity then. And then the clinical judgment station isn't, although obviously it will contain some clinical material, it is mainly to assess your clinical judgment, not your knowledge. And it assesses clinical judgment and decision making, working under pressure, and reflective practice. And next slide. So, and you'll be able to look on the ANRO website, and it still gives you in quite detail about all the domains and the scoring for all of the domains and the whole interview process, as well as all the information about self-assessment. So I strongly suggest that you look at that during your application. Also, we have recently uploaded some mock interviews that are available on the college website. So a mock interview of an applicant undergoing an ST4 interview. So both the clinical and the general clinical judgment station is recorded on there. So you're welcome to have a look at that as well. And just to remind you, in case you don't know where to find the information on the college website, if you go to the training hub and the first box is recruitment, and then click onto that, you'll see all the information about recruitment and the interviews, etc. there on the website. And as I said before, all the information about application to ST4 is on the ANRO website. Recently, the ST4 self-assessment documents have been uploaded, and the applicant guidance will be up there shortly. If you have any queries about or difficulties with any portfolio question uploading particularly, or any help with that, then you need to contact the ANRO help desk. And if you click on their website, there's an email that you need to put in any question to them. Right, so we're going to move back to self-assessment and the criteria now for applications for August 2026. So I think I've already said that, but please do read the information so that in addition to the criteria, which you'll already have seen because it's on the application, the actual grid itself, criteria is on the ANRO website, plus a guidance document and a separate portfolio organisation guidance document. So please have a look at these and read them carefully, because usually if you're not sure where to score something, you'll be able to find the information in these documents. If when you've had a look at these and you're not sure how your evidence fits in, then there will be people in your hospital that you can go and ask for help, so particularly educational supervisor or your college tutor. But please don't contact ANRO or the college about specific things about how many points or whether to put something, upload something or not. And just a reminder, because I'm sure there will be some people that have applied in previous rounds, there is no access to any of your previous applications. So you need to start again from the beginning. And the criteria for this round will be slightly different from the previous rounds if you've applied before. So going on to the organisation of your portfolio, this is not mandatory, but we strongly advise that for each domain, you put a one-page summary for the domain, summarising the evidence and justifying your score. So for instance, you could say, I've self-scored myself 2 points in this domain because of this, and I've uploaded X, Y, and Z documents. And this one-page document is not a separate piece of evidence. It's counted as separate to the number that you're allowed. Ideally, then, if you can put all of your evidence for each domain in one single PDF, that would be very helpful to the assessors, but it's not mandatory to do that. And if you look at the portfolio organisation score documents, it tells you how many documents you're allowed per domain. And if you do go over that, unfortunately, you might lose some points in your portfolio organisation score. We are aware, and this is always the case, that there is a short period of time between when you initially apply on Oriel and then the time window when you come to upload your documents. And it may be during that period of time that you gain extra information or extra certificates or documents, etc. So it is permitted then to upload these extra ones during that time, but you'll need to add it into your portfolio with an explanation when you upload your portfolio. And just be aware obviously we want to give you the points that you deserve, but it does take an assessor around 60 minutes for roughly for every portfolio to review. So if you make it easy to score, then that will be very beneficial to the assessor. And we say this every time, and I know people have busy schedules, but please do allow enough time to upload everything ahead of time and organize it well. It might be worthwhile just in the week, say you think you're not going to have time to finish it until the weekend, that you try to upload 1 or 2 documents ahead of time just to make sure everything works, because the last 48 hours, ANRO staff will not be there if they have any difficulties. So we do strongly suggest that you try and just look at the system and see if you can upload something to make sure it works before the end of that Friday. We're aware, obviously, the guidance document is quite long and it has a lot of information in it, but there always been, particularly in some of the domains, particularly things like domain 10, that the criteria that you have, your evidence doesn't fit exactly with the guidance document. What we would suggest is that if you think that it should get points in that domain, that you submit it with an explanation, and then the assessor can have a look and see how it would fit with the point score. If there's any particular say meetings, etc., or if it's been research or something like that, if you can give links to websites or similar, that will help the assessor, and then they can make a decision on the points allocation. There is a letter of evidence template on the ANRO website, which you can get your educational supervisor or consultant that's, say, been involved in a project with you to sign, which we strongly advise that you use for some of the evidence. But just to remind you that this letter of evidence should be signed by consultants or non-direct training grades senior doctor, except for when it comes to things like trainee research projects, when the trainee chair can sign that letter. And that's just an example of the letter which you'll find, which you can download from the ANRO website. Right, so we come to the actual criteria now. So there are 10 domains with a total of 50 points in total. So the main changes to this year for August 26 is in domain 1, where we are no longer giving any points for any undergraduate degrees or any master's degrees during undergraduate medical degree. But we have changed it so to take into account of the fact that some exams that you will get points for actually have 3 parts of them. So we've distinguished those in the grid this time. So for instance, if you've got 2 out of the 3 parts for MRCP, you can get 3 points, whereas before you'd only get the 2 points for 1. And then if you have the full MRCP, then you get 4 points. And then the rest are higher points where it's less likely that applicants will have these, sort of 5 or 6 points, but we've just put in detail the PhDs and where they would sit in the point score. So just to reiterate, there's no points now for any undergraduate degrees, so that is a change for this year. And we've made it a bit clearer of where the point scores go for postgraduate exams. Just a few more points for domain 1. Sometimes the assessor is not sure. Obviously, you know what you've done, but the assessor is not sure about how to score things like PG masters or certificates. And so if you can write an explanation in, how long has it taken you to do this, how many credits you've taken, then the assessor can see how to give you the points that it should get. And we have it every time, and we have it queries, but just to remind you, anaesthetic and ICM exams from the UK or any other country do not get any points in domain 1 because you need the primary for admission to ST4, and the final FRCA is an exam that should be sat in stage 2 training. So this includes the European Diploma of Anaesthesia and Intensive Care that also does not get any points in domain 1, and neither do any intercalated degrees. We also get queries usually from overseas graduates about MDs. MD as part of a standard anaesthetic training course that some countries have as part of their training, again, does not gain points. It has to be something that's done in addition to the normal training that, in addition to, so that not everyone does this. I mean, you need to upload any certificates or so that, or any qualifications so that we can give the points there. Next slide, please. The other important thing is that we need to have a short CV attached to your domain 1. This is so that assessors can see where your evidence fits into your timeline. For instance, when your audits were done, whether they've done it in the prior to anaesthetic training or during it, and also when we're looking at other posts that you may have had outside of anaesthesia. So it must be included so that the assessor can have a look at this when they look at your evidence. It should be concise. It doesn't have to be very long, but it should list all of your posts and account for all of the gaps. Because I know you have to do this for Oriel, but the assessors don't have any access to Oriel. So we need to see where the gaps are so that we can just work out that you haven't sort of omitted one of the posts that you have done. You won't be penalised for any gaps. We just need to know, that you've had 3 weeks up here, and that will be fine. If, unfortunately, your CV or timeline is missing, then 1 point will be deducted from your portfolio organisation score. And it also may mean that the assessor can't score you accurately in some of the other domains. So this is just a bar graph just to show you in the previous rounds, and obviously the criteria have changed for this year. In other years, the points would be for slightly different things. But you can see over the last few years up until August 25, sort of roughly what proportion of people got so many points. And you can see that it's fairly common for people to get maybe up to 2 points, but anything more than that is quite unusual. Next slide. As I said before, we often get requests and people still do put in their MD when it has been part of their normal anaesthetic training, but just to remind you that this doesn't gain any additional points. It has to be an extra qualification that not everyone in your university or your training program have done. So moving on to domain 2, which is additional achievements and prizes. We haven't really changed this from the last round, and you can see you can get up to 4 points for this. We've just clarified it so that for 1 point, if you've had a postgraduate prize at any time prior to starting anaesthetic training, so this could be another post apart from in foundation training, you would get 1 point. And then prizes from stage 1 anaesthetic training or the equivalent, such as a GRATEX, would give 2 points. And then you get higher points if you've been awarded a prize, for instance, in a regional or national conference or organisation. So I think I've said that already. So just to say that the points that you get for prizes and awards are for the first prize or runner-up prize. Just to say that, we are aware that some hospitals give certificates for GRATEX awards or similar. That's fine. You can upload that and you wouldn't necessarily need anything in addition for that. But if it's just you wouldn't get it, for instance, just say from a consultant just saying, thank you very much for your help overnight with something. It has to be a specific award. If it is your trust policy not to give out sort of certificates, but they have a similar sort of process to GRATEX, then you can ask your ES or your college tutor to confirm this in a letter. And then prizes for the primary FRCA. These are specific prizes and not just high marks for an individual component, for instance, of the exam. And we don't give any points for bursary awards in this domain. So you can see this is the spread of points that people have had in previous rounds from 0 up to 4. And it's fairly common for people to get 2 points, usually for a GRATEX, but you can get higher points if you've had a prize, for instance, at a regional or national level. Moving on to domain 3, this is postgraduate experience in other specialties. And we've not really made any changes to this, to the grid, so it's similar to before. But we've clarified what would be expected for the evidence, which I'll come on to in a minute. So if we just move on to the next slide, please, Drew. Obviously, some people may have been appointed to a post, for instance, from February until, which will start in February and end in July. So at the time of, so that would be next year. So at the time of uploading your portfolio, you won't actually have started that point, so that post. So we can't give any points apart from the time for that post, that because obviously you haven't got any outcomes to be able to upload. So we've just made that clearer. And we're aware of quite a lot of people do combined anaesthetic and ICM posts following stage 1 training prior to taking up ST4 posts. So we count up to 12 months of additional intensive care medicine, but not additional anaesthetics. So if you're in a combined post, you need to make it clear so the assessor knows how much time you've actually spent in the intensive care part of that post. So just looking on from before, some of the comments from before, just to remind you that the additional ICM, which you can count up to 12 months of additional ICM, this needs to be in addition to the normal amount of ICM that you need for stage 1 training. People in the past have lost points if they didn't give evidence of their expected outcomes. And we give in the guidance documents what sort of things we mean by expected outcomes. And this is the only domain where you can have more than 4 pieces of evidence if you've got more than 4 posts that you want to upload evidence for. Next slide, please. So this is the graph showing the points in the previous rounds. So you can see it's quite common for people to get 2 points. Anyone who's done a ACCS post as part of stage 1 training should get 2 points, because we count the 6 months of emergency medicine and acute medicine as 2 points. But you may have other points if you've done other, had experience in other specialties as well. So you can see there's quite a bit of a spread there, depending on what you've done in your career so far. So in addition, we've had this very occasionally. So if you've done, for instance, more than 36 months of clinical experience, you still need to upload it, all of it, even if it exceeds 36 months of clinical experience, because otherwise the assessor can't score you accurately. So make sure that you include all of your evidence. You can't choose not to submit some of it. And that's why one of the reasons we need to check your CV and timeline to confirm your dates. If you're requesting points for, say, 12 months or more in a clinical post or in a specialty with expected outcomes, then make sure you include evidence for this. And as I said, in the guidance documents, we put clearly what sort of things would be suitable. So, for instance, workplace-based assessments or appraisal. So expected outcomes, we would need more than just the confirmation that you have been in that post or been the letter of contract. Moving on to domain 4, which is quality improvement projects. The only change that we've made to this is to the fact that it should be points that can only be given for postgraduate, so nothing done in the undergraduate period would count, because as I'm sure you're aware, that quality improvement is one of the domains that is part of stage 1 training. So we feel that everyone should have been involved to some degree in a quality improvement project. And you get more points for greater involvement, particularly if you have been the lead, and then if you can show that you've implemented changes to practice and then close the audit loops. Next slide, please. Great. You don't have to put in all the audits. You can list them and then give the ones that you want to gain the point score for. If you're not sure that one, for instance, may not give you the points, you can put in a separate one that you're pretty sure that also would give you perhaps, say, lesser points, just to make sure you do get points for that section, provided you don't exceed the amount of downloads for that section. In the past, people lost points if they weren't clear of the role that they did, particularly if the assessor wasn't sure if they'd led or co-led the project, or if you hadn't shown that the recommendations had been implemented. Unfortunately, we had to give people sort of less points last time if they didn't include the PowerPoint slides or equivalents. So this must be included as part of the download. And the assessor will check your CV to see when the projects were done. So that's another reason why it's very important that you upload your CV to the portfolio. As I said, we would expect that all applicants should have some evidence of quality improvement. So it's an opportunity to get points in this domain. And just to remind you that for the highest points in this domain, for 5 points, both of the projects must show how the recommendations to practice have been implemented. So you can see that most people score quite well here. So most people score 4 or 5 points. So if you've got that evidence, make sure that you've uploaded it accurately so that you can get the points that you should get for this domain. As I said, it's common for points to be deducted if applicant didn't provide information that they'd actually led the project, or the assessor wasn't sure, or if they haven't closed the audit loop for the higher point scores. I'm just going to hand over to Drew, who's going to continue with the rest of the presentation now. And then, as I said, we'll have the opportunity to answer some of the questions at the end of the time.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's lovely to join you this evening. Sorry, I have been trying to I've answered 1 or 2 questions as we've been going along, which is why Nikki keeps having to ask me to move slides. Some people are jumping in and asking the questions before we get to the domain. So just if you've got a question related to a domain that we haven't got to yet, it might well be answered there. So, domain 5, research. Again, this domain hasn't changed very much at all. In fact, I don't think it's changed at all. We have made it very clear that to gain 3 points, you need to have completed an NIHR Associate Principal Investigator scheme, not just enrolled in it. And we have tried to make sure that we identify those projects which are actually research, which trainees across the country may well be involved with. SNAP1, for example, Camelot, these are research. In this domain, it's particularly useful in this domain to get a letter of evidence because that can explain exactly what exactly what your involvement is in a project. Or a certificate of involvement which explains exactly what you've done. It can sometimes be difficult as assessors to ascertain exactly what the role is, and this is one example where if you're not explicit about your role, then you may not gain as many points as you think you should. Make sure that in this domain that it is research and not audit, and definitely not surveys. Quite often we have applicants who submit evidence in domain 5 for things like NAP or NELA, and these are not research. The majority of applicants who request points in this domain actually show very clear evidence, and this is a domain that is not, as we will go to when we get to the end and we look at the reviews, this is not often appealed because most of the evidence is very, very clear. You can see here that there's actually a reasonably good spread. It's very, very unusual for somebody to score 5 in this domain, but there's a good spread across 2, 3, and a few more into 4. So this is quite a discriminatory domain. We do realise that many people will not have any involvement in research, but they often have stronger evidence in other domains. Sometimes we are aware that assessors don't always give the correct points for a site lead for a national research training project. And if you do, if you are the lead for a national project, and you don't feel that you've got enough points, you can appeal that. Again, as I say, sometimes if you've not made it clear, or if the assessor misunderstands the evidence which has been submitted, then there is an opportunity to appeal that. Domain 6 is the teaching domain. Now, again, there hasn't really been any change in this. Each year we try and clarify the guidance, and there's quite often a little bit of change to the guidance, so it's really important that you use the most up-to-date guidance. We identify issues where there has been a problem when somebody has not been clear in their information, and we try and include that in the guidance. So please always make sure that you look at the criteria but with the guidance in hand as well. We haven't really changed this particularly. We have, however, added in a leadership position in education. So, for example, a teaching fellow will now score you 2 points, but it's really important to submit a summary of the role that you played and the details of how that education has been improved. For 4 points, you'll see here that a regional teaching activity needs to have been a series of events. And when we say a series, there needs to be at least 2 events. And so we need to see something that has been repeated, and it must be at least 3 hours long. And all teaching events need to have been delivered. It's not just something that you've planned for the future. If you submit a programme, then that will aid assessors. This is something that we see each submission, each round, is those who teach in a large trust which has multiple sites, where they submit their score and ask for this to be considered regional. That is not regional, that is still considered as local. And that's quite often the case as well when applicants submit evidence from teaching which they've done based at a university. Again, that would be considered local rather than regional. Teaching as a part of a faculty gains 2 points, and to gain more you need to show evidence that you've been involved in organising a teaching event. We will come back later on in Domain 10 to touch on people who organise an event but don't actually teach on it. That will come in under Domain 10. Again, this is quite a good domain from a discrimination point of view. You'll see that a lot of people will score either 2 points or 5 points here. Interestingly, we're still seeing a very small number of applicants who don't score any points. Not many, but we still see people who are not scoring any points, which is always a surprise, obviously, because teaching is one of the domains involved in stage 1 training. So we have updated the guidance to suggest that you should include a programme which shows the length of a teaching programme. Claiming higher points when it's not a series of events, it's just a single teaching session. That's always something that we see, and if it's not clear your role in organising the teaching. Now again, this may be somewhere where a letter of evidence would be useful, because a college tutor or educational supervisor can explain your role in organising teaching. it is not enough to just be part of a faculty. You need more detail and organisation. And obviously many of you will be involved in things like ALS instructing, ATLS instructing, and that's great, and you can score points for that, but that's not an organisational role, and it's the higher, the role of organisation which will score you a bit more points in this domain. Domain 7 is academic publications. Again, this has not changed at all. But again, we've tried to clarify our guidance a little bit more on this. Everything must be PubMed listed or peer reviewed. And if it is not PubMed listed, then you need to provide us evidence for peer review. Now that can be evidence from the website. Very often things are published online now rather than the journal itself, and the website itself will show us that it's peer reviewed, but you do need to give us evidence that something is peer reviewed. You need to either upload a link to the publication or the publication itself. Now, if there's a very long publication, it's useful if you can to highlight that your name there that shows that you've been involved in the publication, so that we're not having to search through a huge publication. You can get points if a publication has been accepted but has not yet been published. However, it does need to be in the final stages. So many publications will go back and forward a few times, and we really need to ensure that this is, thank you very much, this has been accepted, we're happy that it's going to be published, and we will give you points for that. But again, we need to see evidence. This is not just a, this is not just a first draft. Publications relating to the undergraduate period do count here. We feel that the experience which was gained, even if you published as an undergraduate, is something which can be included, even though it will have occurred several years prior to this submission. But publications related to the undergraduate period do count. Some applicants have put in surveys that have been published. These will not score any points, and publications do need to be relevant to medicine. Every year we get asked about people submitting things to, for example, Anaesthesia News or the Bulletin, and we would consider these as being peer-reviewed publications. Again, a reasonable spread across Domain 7 for publications. There are a number of people who haven't published anything, but you can see there that there's actually quite a good spread across this domain in what people are submitting. Presentations. Again, this has not changed this year, but we've tried to update the guidance to ensure that it's as clear as possible. Local presentations of an audit or QI project which has already been submitted in Domain 4 will not gain points in this domain. However, if a project has been submitted in Domain 4 as a QI project, but it's presented at a regional or national meeting, then this can gain further points. But obviously we would need to see the evidence for that. So ideally, if you have more than one QI or audit project, then use different projects. But as I say, to gain points in Domain 4, you need to have undertaken a local presentation, and we will not double count there. You need to include your poster or your presentation as evidence of the meeting, at the meeting that you presented at. And it's really important that we need to have evidence on the PowerPoint or similar of dates. To gain 5 or indeed 6 points, then you need to have been a speaker in an auditorium, or if it's an online conference, to a whole group of people. And again, that's something which I'll come back to in a second. Every application round, there are those who stand in front of a panel of judges and then submit that as an oral presentation. That is not an oral presentation. Obviously, there are some meetings where 2 or 3 of the best poster presentations will be invited to present at the meeting itself, and that would that can be included if you provide evidence for that. In the vast majority of cases, if you are a speaker presenting in an auditorium in front of a whole auditorium, then your name would be in a speaker's programme, and the evidence can be used. If you supply the programme, then that can be used as evidence that you have presented. You can also use the same meeting as an educational event in Domain 9, as long as you evidence that you've attended the meeting, not just gone to the poster presentation. And all presentations must be given. It is not, unfortunately, good enough to simply have been accepted for a future meeting. You can see here that a lot of people are scoring 4 points because many people have presented a poster at a conference. Well over 50% of people will gain at least 4 points for this, and only a small number are gaining 5 or 6 points. As I've already said, it is not just about standing in front of a panel of judges. That is not the equivalent to an oral presentation in front of an auditorium. Some applicants are still telling us that they have presented a poster, but they have not included a copy of their presentation. And if that is the case, then you will not be able to gain points, unfortunately. Domain 9, continuing professional development. Again, there's been no change to this domain, but we have tried to clarify in the guidance some of the supporting information for this domain. The guidance document gives examples of mandatory training and the evidence which you should upload. It does not need to be 100% of mandatory training. Mandatory training is different across different trusts, but we need to see some examples of mandatory training. We have been asked in the past, and we've clarified this in the guidance document, about some trusts who say that, for example, specific courses, specific clinical courses are mandatory for all their trainees, but this is not clinical courses. This is more things like fire safety, equality and diversity, for example. If the certificate for evidence for CPD does not state the number of CPD points, then you have to upload the programme to evidence that. The guidance tells you CPD is not just about a 1 hour event. It is about a half day, as a minimum a half day programme, and most half day programmes would have at least 3 CPD points. So if it does evidence the number of CPD points, that gives us an idea that it's been at least a half day. But ideally, if it doesn't state, if it's not clear in the certificate, then you must upload the programme. All certificates must be in date, and they should have been attended within the last 5 years. So if you've got ATLS but it's out of date, then unfortunately that doesn't count. A lot of people are gaining 5 points in this section. Again, we've tried to clarify, if you go to a 2-day national meeting, then that can count as both a national meeting and as a more than 1 day meeting as well. So the same meeting could count for 2 components to get 5 points here. Applicants, as I say, don't need to have completed all mandatory training, but the other thing which we have seen in the past is where people have submitted evidence of mandatory training, but it doesn't have their name on the evidence, and it's really important that your name must be on the evidence or we will not be able to give you the points for that. Again, we've tried to clarify this, but the definition of a regional or a national meeting is not about the attendees, it is about the organisation itself. So even if international attendees come to a meeting, it doesn't mean that the meeting is therefore regarded as an international meeting. It's about the organisation of the meeting which makes it regional or national. So even when your certificate says a national meeting, we need to have evidence that would justify that. And we've tried to make it very, very clear in the guidance what the definition of regional and national is. Domain 10, leadership and management. There have been a couple of changes in this domain. It is always one of the hardest domains to score because there is so much evidence which can be presented. And we've tried to stress to people in the guidance document that sometimes the assessor has to judge, has to look at the evidence that you present and fit it into a score, and that might not necessarily meet the score that you think it should meet. But leadership and management obviously is one which there are a huge amount of different activities which could have been undertaken which could evidence this domain, and therefore it does make it one of the hardest ones to evidence. We have tried to update the criteria to make it as clear as possible, and postgraduate gains more points. You can gain some points for doing something as an undergraduate in this domain, but definitely postgraduate gains more points. Leadership qualifications are scored in this domain, and local management positions would be scored in this domain as well. You do need to detail your role, you need to show the time commitment and the achievements, and these should be documented in a letter of evidence from an educational supervisor or a college tutor would be really helpful in this domain. Organising a one-day study day locally or regionally will score you 2 points in this domain, or 3 points if it's a national score, but you must not use a course that you provided as evidence in domain 6 because it will already have achieved more points in domain 6 for your organisation. So this is only for something we've seen in previous applications where a resident has organised a study day but hasn't, it's been all consultants that have taught on it, for example, but that would score you points for the organisational skills in domain 10. Again, you can see a good spread across this domain for the points which are scored. As I've already said, it's difficult to assess, and we would encourage applicants to provide as much information as possible to show why they've scored themselves the score that they've given. Higher points for more recent leadership activities will be awarded in this domain. And so now we go on to I should have updated this slide. It hasn't been known as Global Rating Score for quite a long time now. It is the Portfolio Organisation Score. And this is a score which has always been there, but from August 24 it's been known as the Portfolio Organisation Score. All applicants for this score will start with 5 points, and then potentially points will be deducted. And it's important to look, this is a separate document on the ANRO website. You should have a look at it because it will explain what points will be deducted for. And since we changed the name to the Portfolio Organisation Score, it can also be appealed, and we'll come back to that in a second when we look at all the reviews. So you can see here the majority of people, nearly 80%, are scoring 5 points. With a small number, the score reduces. So just reflecting on previous rounds, so we don't have the information for the most recent round, which was round 3 as yet, because it's only just finished. So we'll look back at self-assessment for August 2025, and since the majority of you will be applying for August 2026, then that's probably the one that you're most interested in. So there were 699 applicants last year, and that was quite a big jump from 2024 when there was only 640. Only one person was not longlisted, and then for a variety of reasons people did not submit evidence, and therefore 661 portfolios were reviewed and scored. So looking at the self-assessment data, we're going to we've looked as we've gone along at individual domains. We're going to have a wee look at the appeals and which domains were appealed. So just to give you an idea, this was for this time last year. This was the applicant score, which is the in the purple, and the verified score, so after it had been verified by an assessor, is in pale blue. Or for those that can't make out the colours, it is the first column is the unverified score and the second is the verified score. So for this time last year, 161 applicants requested a review, which is just under a quarter of people who were applying. You'll see that that was down a little bit from 2023, although up a little bit from 2024. 23 of these were only for the portfolio organisation score, and if we include the total number of reviews for portfolio organisation, which was 65, there were 240 domains reviewed. Some assessors didn't take account of extra evidence that an applicant had uploaded, and this was one of the reasons that a review was requested, and that is entirely reasonable. Sometimes it's just not picked up. The assessors will sometimes agree with a score and then accidentally mark the wrong score in the review. So these are things which applicants request every round, and it is of course entirely appropriate for you to ask for that review. So as I say, 68 applicants. Well, this is looking at the most recent round because I do have this information. So 21.3% of applicants for round 3, the round that has just closed, have requested a review. 6 of those were portfolio only, portfolio organisation score only, and excluding the pause, 91 domains were reviewed. Going back to round 2 this time last year, the majority of people were asking for just one domain to be reviewed, but you can see there that we actually got up to 8 domains. When you ask for a review, you would only ask for specific domains to be reviewed. Your whole application is not reviewed again. It's only specific domains that you feel that you have been underscored with. Very, very rarely we have actually been asked to review because somebody feels they've been overscored. It's the majority, it's underscored. And this just looks at the domains for which were requested for review. You can see there that actually the majority were portfolio organisation score, but domain 10 and domain 6 are actually the domains which are reviewed the most. So the score changes after review. Just over half the score went up, about 40% the score was unchanged, but you'll see there that after review, a very small number were actually reduced, and that's because an experienced panel has looked at the domain, and you do have to accept that if you ask for a review, that there is a slim possibility, and it is only a very small number, that it could be reduced further. And this just looks at the score changes per domain. The first column is demonstrates scores which went up. So you'll see there that a lot of the portfolio organisation scores which were appealed did increase. The pale blue, or the middle column, is the scores that remained unchanged, and then a very small number you can see there. The final column, or the purple column, were the ones that were reduced in number. There were 15 instances in the round 2 last year where the initial assessor didn't review the applicant's updated information. As Nikki demonstrated earlier on, there will be situations where you may, for example, score yourself and not give yourself anything for a publication, but then a publication is accepted for a publication, and that scores you extra points, or you present at a conference and that scores you extra points. Some assessors didn't follow the pause guidance and incorrectly remove scores, for example, where an applicant maybe gave themselves a higher score than the assessor, or for not including a domain score explanation. And that's something that we pick up in the review. If you feel that a domain, including the pause, that you've been scored wrongly, then please do request a review. You are not penalised for requesting a review. And as I mentioned already, there were some assessors who agreed. They stated in the system that they agreed with the applicant score, but then they accidentally clicked on the wrong score, and the applicant was therefore marked down. And again, that's a very easy one for us to correct. Be very specific. If you think that a score needs to be adjusted, you need to be as specific as possible as to why you believe it is to be adjusted. Nikki already mentioned this. Please do not say, I submitted this in the last application and it scored 4 points, and therefore I think I've submitted the same thing, so why have I not scored 4 points? We do not have any access to any previous applications. You need to be as specific as possible if you ask for a review. For diplomas and certificates, a description of the course, the number of credits, and how it was assessed is really, really important. You cannot provide more evidence. The evidence is scored on what you have provided for their original upload. So please don't offer to provide more evidence, or say, please look at this website for more information. You cannot provide more evidence if you ask for a review. And very importantly, and it states very, very clearly in the documentation, that final decision of the review panel is final. It cannot be reviewed again. So we've covered a huge amount in this, and there is an opportunity now to think about some of the questions and